I watched the rallies that I filmed in 2014 in the last 6 months, and it was still
Really cool.
really good Roundnet. Like there's, I don't know, I feel like they were really good at doing what they were doing on sand. Like, and we're not seeing that anymore. And like, if I can do anything to bring
Okay.
back some of it.
So this podcast exploration focuses on just bringing people into the conversation that know a lot of things, and especially when they know a lot of things about something I know very little about. I'm really excited to talk to one of my old friends today, Charles Henri, about a lot of his journeys around it, and specifically his journey in creating a new Roundnet brand called Revol, something I know zero about. I've never done anything Roundnet manufacturing wise. So very excited to share some of his insights with you all, and I'm probably going to learn a lot of things too because he is somewhat of a Roundnet historian from Canada. So Charles, welcome, and thank you so much for sitting down for this chat.
Hi, thanks for having me for my first podcast appearance.
Yeah, it's a funny thing to be just doing podcasting, but at the end of the day, I'm hopeful you can just share a lot of your experience with people, and so I'm appreciative of you making it on. I'll start with an easy one for you. Like you said, it's your first time, so I'll start with the softball. Tell me about like what your first experience that you can remember of Roundnet and um, how you discovered it.
Yeah, so I was on a student trip in San Diego in June of 2013, and on the last day of the trip, I was going to surf, and I saw people play people playing in the park next to the beach. Since my background is tennis, I thought it looked really fun, and I went to them and they showed me how to play, and um, I took a note in my phone. And 1 year later, I was in Montreal, and it was after a long winter, and I was with a friend of mine called Marius, and we were in his living room, and I was in my phone, and I saw a spike ball, and that's when I we went on YouTube and saw uh, Buddy Hammond's videos, promotional video from back then on Sen, and we each bought a kit from there, the Spikeball regular kit, and started playing next to the University of Montreal. And everyone came to see us and wanted to play, and it was just so accessible, and everyone wanted to play more and own a set. So that's when I looked up for a tournament, and I showed up at the with Marius. We played as a mac and cheese at Coney Island in 2014, and that was my first tournament experience, and it was the biggest tournament at that time, which was like 92 teams, which is like kind of a small, uh, small medium size event in 2023, but it was the biggest at that time, and Chris Reuter was there that day, and that's when I met him, and that's when I started working with them to promote their brand and Roundnet in general.
Awesome. Wow, covered a ton of ground. I think like that being your first tournament, was that where you kind of decided that you wanted to go all in on building and growing the community back home and in Montreal and Canada more generally? Like what kind of did anything specific happen in those conversations or in those games where you got to play in that first tournament?
Yeah, so with Marius, we wanted to do more. We knew it wasn't like really accessible with the custom clearance, like all the fees that we had to pay for kit at that time. We had to pay like 40 Canadian dollars to just for one kit to cross the border. So we showed up at the tournament. We didn't know what to expect, and by talking with Chris and one of his main directors at the time. I think he's still there, yeah. But I bought the kits that were used on the day. Actually, there were 92 teams, so there were 40 kits, regular kits that were used that day, and 20 kits were sold to players with a discount because they were used and sandy, and I bought the other 20 and brought them back to Montreal. And I knew that I had friends who were waiting for a kit, and in a week I had sold the 20 spikeball kits. So that's when I realized that I could do I could do some money, and I could also, like, there was something to do because nobody wanted to pay over $100 for a regular kit back in Montreal.
Yeah. Maybe jumping ahead a little bit, like you start figuring out you can do some ambassador work, selling sets. Were there any other like ambitions you had initially aside from, okay, I can share this game with people? Do you have any other ambitions about organizing? I know I don't want to jump ahead, but like you kind of started building a community. Did you have any personal goals that are otherwise around the sport?
I started by being an ambassador for Spikeball and being an ambassador of the sport and selling kits, and um, I also started hosting a few events in Montreal um, for a few months. And when it got bigger and other ambassadors jumped in the adventure, uh, I joined them to start the Quebec tour. So that's when I graduated, and I started focusing more since I had my full time job. I started focusing more on promoting, not promoting, hosting events and growing the competitive scene, and not selling as many kits. And yeah.
Nice. Yeah, you mentioned like having like these balancing priorities with kind of like the real world of like the full time job, and then also Roundnet. Tell me a little more about like where Roundnet Montreal and the broader Quebec scene started to grow. Tell me about how you got involved, why you got involved in that community, and what did you maybe learn from working in those teams or on those community projects, and um, yeah, just share a little more about that origin story because it was one of probably the earlier communities that really popped up. Quebec Roundnet has been really big for a really long time, and maybe not everybody knows.
Yeah, I had so our community, we we created a Facebook page called Spikeball Montreal. I had a friend make us a clean logo, and from there we just started announcing, posting or meets um, at different time during the week, and we would have just so many players come because it was new and it was fun. So um, yeah, we had bigger meets and bigger tournaments, and after that, that's when we started working on a provincial tour, uh, a few ambassadors together.
Nice. And I know maybe skipping a couple of years from that starting to Roundnet Canada becoming a thing, but um, what kind of goals did you have in mind for both Roundnet Quebec and then as you kind of transition to looking nationally at Roundnet Canada? What were the aspirations for these organizations for Roundnet?
Yeah, so if the discussion about a international federation and national governing bodies started, I feel like maybe in 2019 or early, like at the beginning of the pandemic. And I felt like I was in a pretty good position to help uh, jumpstart the creation of a provincial and a national governing body. So I think it was 6 months in, 6 months in the pandemic. I reached out to a few. So we had the Quebec tour um, run for 3 years in a row from 2017 to 2019. And then in between 2019 and 2020, when the pandemic started, we had to cancel the season for 2020. And that's when, with all the life changes that everyone were having, I was the only one left on the board for the Quebec tour. And since I was the only one, and we didn't have a process of electing board members or anything, we didn't have a board or anything. It wasn't like that official. that's when I realized that we needed something more official, and I wanted to make the tour part of a governing body that would do more than just run tournaments during the summer, develop growth on the youth side. There were so many things that a provincial or national governing body could do. So I reached out to a few players, hosts in Montreal to ask them if they wanted to help me start the Fédération Québécoise, the Roundnet in the province. So we were a group of 5 maybe for the first year. We started that, and at the same time I had discussions with other ambassadors of the sport in other provinces to start a governing body for the upcoming Worlds that were supposed to happen in 2020. So yeah, we had those discussions at the same time, and yeah, for a year, the first year of Revol, I was also starting 2 governing bodies. So I was, my life was all about Roundnet.
Wow. Yeah. Just to kind of capture the end of that, you mentioned a lot of people are kind of flying all over the place trying to build these different teams, and you kind of were one of the people who was maybe like a mainstay with transitions. Is there any advice you have for people who are working on building Roundnet in their communities and are trying to get more people on their teams to maybe not have your life be all about Roundnet like you?
To not forget that it's like the organizations and the governing bodies, or like the goal is to always have fun. It has to stay fun, and also it has to stay like about the sport, about Roundnet, about how to grow Roundnet, and not since the sport is so young. I feel like it's hard sometimes to not put your not personal, but not how can I say this? Can we switch to French?
Go ahead, and then I'll try to translate.
Yeah, it's just to keep the sport in mind, and keep in mind that maybe 2-3 years down the road you won't be part of the organizations anymore, but the decisions that you take, they're gonna last, and so you have to make sure that they're not biased too much by how they can help your personal situation.
Yeah, I think like especially in the NGB and international federation side of things, like it is about the sport, it's about the community. I definitely share that sentiment that I like a lot of things that we do for fun are for us, and so like we like playing around it because it's like it's about us. We're having a good time competing or with our friends, but then when we're building like communities and organizations, we're part of something. It's not for us. It's for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to try that in French also for everybody? Somewhere along the way, you mentioned that first year of Revol was while you were working on Roundnet Canada and Roundnet Quebec. Tell me about when Revol maybe was even just like a thought for Charles, because that first year you were probably doing the real work. When did you start thinking about creating Revol overall?
It was a long process. When I started playing, as I mentioned before, my first tournament was I might have not.
Yeah, in 2014.
It was summer, but it was Summer Spike.
Yeah.
So it was the big tournament on the beach in New York, in Coney Island, and at that time, even on sand, like sand was crazy. When I watched the finals, it was in between Handsome Beavers and Chico Spikes. At the time, they were always in the finals, and the touches, the rallies were crazy, even on sand. And it wasn't about serving pressure or anything. They were just tapping on serves and playing defense, and you just wanted to play defense like them. So that's when I fell in love with the sport. And as time started to pass, um, the meta changed, and the players started to ask for to have discussions on the Spikeball, the SRA Facebook group, and the discussions were about what can we do to improve the sport, to bring back rallies. Players were asking for rule changes for different. Were testing equipment, or were asking for different stuff, because year after year there were more aces and less rallies, fewer rallies, and yeah, that's I had that in mind. And you start playing, you have many rallies, and you end up playing, and sometimes you play some games that the only things that you do is just like switch with your partner, just switch positions, like it's not a. So yeah, that's when the meta changed. I I had fell in love because of the rallies. So I wanted to test a few things to see if I could bring back more rallies, rally ball.
You mentioned this like love of Roundnet and trying to keep the rallies alive. So how did
Yes.
you go about designing the elements of Revol, the shape, the dimensions? Like, what was the
Yeah.
experimentation like?
So the first test I did, it was in the summer of 2019, when, like, in the middle of all the discussions for equipment change and how can we, like, before the no hit zone, how can we give defense a better chance, make defense a viable option, bring it back as a way to win games. So the first test I did was put a plywood board on top of a Spikeball Pro set. And there used to be a few Revol prototypes on the sidelines of Spikeball tournaments. Players would have what they call the spike table, which would be just a high board in the air, and they would play in between games, and they would report their scores. That was before Fuengo. They would go to the tent and report their scores, and there would be this spike table there, and they would just rally off a board. And so this thought in my head, I just had to test it. I was like, if you can rally off any furniture in your house, any garbage, any garbage can, anything that is circular, why do we need the net? So that's when I started asking myself, do we need the netting? Does it create something that is like necessary, or can we get rid of it, like in ping pong, they have a ball bouncing and there's no netting. It's a flat surface and the angles are predictable. And so yeah, I tested with a plywood board on top of a kit, and offense was even more overpowered because the ball was never pocketing, lipping up, and giving defense more time. So that's when I started changing the dimensions of the board, decreasing the diameter to try to find a balance. So I was doing all my tests with a regular size Roundnet ball, a pro ball or a regular spike ball, and I decreased the diameter of the board until there was some balance in between offense and defense. And even if the board was getting pretty small, it was like half of the area of a spike ball net, and you could still hit so low. If the set was good, defense was not a thing. So that's when I started increasing the diameter again, but raising the lip. That's where the raised lip comes from. Because without the lip, you could hit like sideways. So I started increasing the diameter again and raising the lip and making like testing and making calculations about what the exit angle should be for defense to have a better chance. And yes, so that's how I got the flat surface, the board for a predictable bounce, and then the diameter and the lip, they go together. If I wanted to have a bigger target, bigger board, I needed to raise the lip even more. I did testing, and for a first version, the best dimensions were the ones that you've seen on social media. Those were the best dimensions, and actually they were not the best dimensions to play with a small ball. The balance at the top level, I needed to I don't have another
That's
word
okay.
than nerf, but I needed to nerf offense even more than the current
Right.
Revol set. But since all the players were asking for a bigger ball, and from my experience at that time, a bigger ball would come off slower and give defense more time, I went for dimensions that were a little bit below what gave me the best balance, because I didn't want the target to be too small to and prevent me to increase the size of the ball. So I undershot. I don't know under.
Yeah, you
I went a little
compensated.
bit
You
under.
compensated for like the bigger ball by giving more room to hit the ball lower.
Yes, because the bigger ball didn't exist. So
You couldn't test. You had to kind of make an
I
estimate
couldn't
at the
test. I
end.
had to go for something a little bit easier for offense. And after that, what I realized is that one of the really nice thing with the board is that you can test any ball on a net. I've tried testing many different balls through the years, but because of the netting, since the bounce comes from the net and there's like a balance in between the spike ball and the spike ball net, you cannot change the weight and the size of the ball that much. It starts, the net is not made for it, and it starts denting the net too much and pocketing too much. So with the board, I was able to test maybe 30 different balls. And by playing off a board, all the balls would come off with the same angle. So yeah, I tested different materials, different balls, and then the ball that was the easiest that brought the most balance to Revol gameplay in the short term was a bigger pro ball. So that's when I started to work on it, and it took more than a year, almost 2 years. It's super complicated to get consistency. I've heard like in the last few days that I think Premier Spike, they're having the same issues. Spikeball uh, has a few years. They have the advantage of like 15 years ahead of us for like fixing stuff with the material and
Right.
the size of the ball. So yeah, the different competitors, we have to find a way to standardize the size, the material, the manufacturing, and everything. Yeah.
That was a really awesome rundown of all the different, I guess, variables that you're trying to change from like where the sport was to what you wanted it to look like by pulling and shifting all the levers of the net, style, tension, the exit angle with the lip, the ball size, the dimensions, the diameter. So really cool rundown there. Wanted to take like a step aside because I know you wanted to speak to it too, and I actually have a fun anecdote about the name of Revol. Right now on Instagram, it says like it's like the Roundnet Revolution, Roundnet Revolution. But yeah, tell for those who maybe don't know, what is Revol? What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I'll start. I'll start from the beginning. So Spikeball's lawyers told them that they had to find a different name for the sport, because at that time, in 2015, everyone was calling the sport Spikeball. And if everyone was to use Spikeball as the generic name for the sport, they would have issues with their trademark in the future. So one of the first names that they came up with was Revol. It was East Coast guys that came up with the name, I think so. And it was from the it meant revolution, but not revolution of the sport. Revolution because the sport is 360, like we all know. So the court, there's no sides and there's no boundaries. So revolution, we revolve
Yeah.
around the kit. So it came from there, and also a contraction with volleyball because we have the last three letters represented uh, the three touches that we get per team, every position. So when I was looking for a name, I wanted a name that was catchy and that I don't know if I just said it, but Spikeball, they heard the name and they chose Revol for the name of the sport for a month, I think. And Spikeball's lawyers told them, you cannot change the name of the sport. You cannot expect people to switch from Spikeball to Revol because it's too unique. It's not descriptive enough. And if you, for a sport, for people to adopt the new name, you have to you need something more descriptive. So they dropped Revol and they went for Roundnet. And so at that time, I would have never expected that I would use the name in the future. But I had this in my mind, and when I was looking for a name, I knew that the OGs would like the illusion,
Yeah.
and so I went for Revol, and also I wanted to revolutionize the sport in a way, bring back more rallies, and in French, Revol means rebound. So I wanted something catchy, and the name Revol for me had four different significations. Is that a word?
Yeah. They're all words.
Okay.
My
It's a word in
my
French.
fun fact here is the very first Roundnet tournament I played was in 2015, and I show up, and Ian Golembeski, a Roundnet OG, probably one of the people that helped come up with this, is like, by the way, guys, we're calling it Revol, and I'm just sitting there like, it's my first tournament, and I'm just very confused as to what we're calling Revol, but I just shrug it off, and then a couple months later, like it's like Roundnet regionals instead of Revol regionals.
Yeah, that's funny.
But a very jarring first
David
day for me playing Roundnet.
David Gonzalez sent me a poster of a tournament he hosted, I think, in May of 2015.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And the tournament was a Revol tournament ahead of its time.
Yeah, he ran one of the first ever Revol tournaments. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, love the history of Roundnet, especially through like such a long like frame there. Just taking a step back, I've been keeping up with some of the stuff you've done in media, and I wanted to check on kind of where you see Revol in the Roundnet ecosystem right now, because you're running this tour in mostly Quebec on Revol equipment, and obviously for most people that play Roundnet, it's really different, and maybe it's a little too scary to even try doing something different because everybody is worried about messing up their skills that they might have, and things like that. So yeah, just wanted to just get your take as someone who's trying to revolutionize Roundnet, how you see Revol fitting into the sport, whether it's now or in the future. You're welcome to go wherever with it.
Yeah, so like I just said, Spikeball is years ahead. Spikeball will stay the main supplier for years to come, and the one of the goals was to bring back rallies. In the long term, it was also to, if I can, put pressure on Spikeball a little bit, like Premier Spike is trying to do. Like, if we're gonna have a main supplier, if there's no competition, they don't have any incentive to invest more in the sport, do more R&D, take their role as a leader if they're the only one. But if there's pressure from the outside, from other brands, and they're their lead is under, I don't know how to say it, but
Under pressure, yeah.
yeah, under pressure. It means there's more money in it, there's more sponsors, and yeah, my goal is for the sport like to be for for a sports fan that doesn't play Roundnet to go to a Roundnet event in the future and pay to watch top level. That's one of my goals.
Just to fall in love the
Uh,
same way that you fell in love watching Chico versus Hanson Beavers, right? Just
yeah,
like have that experience of like that was sick.
yeah, yeah. A long-term goal for Revol would be to have paid athletes, people only playing Revol as their day job. That's my goal in the next 5 to 10 years.
Awesome. Um, if you want to tell me a little more about, I don't know if makes sense, but I'm kind of going off script. Tell me about separate from Revol, like you mentioned the day job you had before. Do you mind, like, if you're able to open up about where Revol is right now? Is it something you're doing full time? Is it more than full time? Is it part time? How does it fit into the life of Charles?
So I am an optometrist. So I do eye exams. I did that. So I graduated in 2016 before the Quebec tour. When the Quebec tour we started it, that's when I started focusing less on selling spikeball sets and focusing more on the community and event organization side. And in 2020, when I started testing different things that led to Revol, a year later, I really wanted to focus on Revol gameplay, the dimensions, the materials, the ball, to make sure that it was as good as it could for the first version of Revol. So I took 2 years off optometry.
Wow.
The last 2 years, actually. I just started doing eye exams again in May.
Whoa.
So yeah, I took 2 years off. I focused on the ball. It took way longer than I thought. Everything on the manufacturing side to develop a new kit in during the pandemic it was the worst timing.
Yeah.
But I
It's pretty
studied
fun though.
eyes, so I studied eyes, so I didn't know like that it would be that difficult during the pandemic. But it was like timing wise, it was hard. That's why the Revol set was marketed in the beginning without any balls, and that's something that I learned. But since I'm an early adopter in general, I test stuff. I like to test by myself. I like to talk about new ideas. I like to change stuff. I thought that by releasing the Revol set and tell players like, hey, with the board you can test any Roundnet ball that you like, they'd test it and they'd see they'd try to push the limits and find the limits of Revol. But I realized that it wasn't gonna work that way, and I would need the next, let's say, 2 years to do those tests by myself and with the help of the players that I would surround myself with. So yeah, it's been a fun adventure. I'm learning every day. I really like it. I had to go back to optometry for the last few weeks just because I have to pay rent. But yeah, with Revol, sales are starting to ramp up in schools because Revol has many advantages that PE teachers can see as soon as they play and they teach with the Revol set. So I've been focusing on schools for the last year and a half while I was developing the ball, and now that I have a ball, I've been having a ball, the Revol ball, for the last 5 months. So now I'll be focusing more in the next few months on hosting events, creating content, having ambassadors to help me because I can't do everything by myself. But now I can go forward with all those steps because I'm confident in the product and in the Revol gameplay and all the top players. I've had a few top players try it for the first time in the last month, and they really enjoyed it. So I'm just gonna keep pushing and host bigger events. And at one point, I'm gonna have my own ambassadors, and there might be some kind of split in the community, but there's gonna be a split with Spikeball, Premier Spike, Mammoth Kit anyway. So might as well be part of the be part of the discussion.
Yeah. Taking like a step back from like the Revol and pushing those goals forward, what are some things, some aspirations you have for Roundnet more generally?
Uh, yeah, like I said earlier, I want athletes to play it like full time. That would be amazing to see. So I think Roundnet has a really high potential because of the 360 and the accessibility. And there's so many advantages to Roundnet that other sports don't have. And I feel like if we put, like, even I just mentioned all the different suppliers, the main suppliers. And if as a community we take all the data, all the, if we put everything together, I think we could have a sport that is like, how to say this, like there's the big major sports that they can't change a few things that they would like to change to improve watchability, to improve fun while playing, because there's too much money in it. But since we don't have the money in it, I feel like if we do well our homework and put everything together, we could make sure that the sport has this nice foundation to grow in the next few years and end up where we want it to be. But if we're not active enough, if we're too like passive, um, I feel like we could end up in the position that other sports are a few years in, where, like, let's say in volleyball, they'd like to raise the height of the the net to have more rallies, but there's money in it. Players have been playing with this height for 20 years, so they're never gonna change the height of the net. Uh, but yeah, I feel like we're in that period where if we analyze everything and put everything together from all the different testing and all the different kits, um, there's something really nice ahead of us.
That's super well put. I think like the bottom line there is to grow this sport, we all have to be pretty open minded about change,
Yeah.
and that we probably aren't playing the finished version of Roundnet right now, even if it is fun for whatever reason, whichever part of the game you like. Um, but also that there's work to do. Like we have to have the open mind, but also we maybe have to do some of the testing, like you were saying. It's maybe not going to be handed to us because we don't have the money in the sport. We have to probably go solve it as a community.